Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 823. I'm Tom Quigley, your host. Today, well, it's been an interesting week. A funny thing happened. The introduction and the outro words are going to be abbreviated this week. I will regale you with the tale of the Avon Lake tornado next week. Now, I need to find a way of making everything work without electricity and the internet. I'm not sure which is making me crazier. The SPaMCAST 823 features a discussion with Kirk Marple, technical founder and CEO at Graphit by Unstruk Data. What is a technical founder, you may ask? No? Well, I asked. More importantly, we discussed AI, knowledge graphs, leadership, and how organizations learn as they understand their data. Are you ready to talk learning from data? It's time for the conversation. Kirk Marple, technical founder. Well, I'm going to ask about that at some point. What's a technical founder? And CEO of Graphit. Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Yeah, thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Before we dive deep in, technical founder, other kinds of founders, what's a technical founder?
Yeah, I think it was something I added to kind of differentiate that. When people meet me for the first time or like online, just to know that, we don't have a CTO per se. So I kind of do double duty. And this is a platform that I really, has been my vision for many years. So it was just to kind of pass along that information of, hey, talk technical to me and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'm not just business. I'm technical. I'm all in. I understand that. So, let's, I've interviewed over the past year, 2 years, 3 years, a number of people in the AI space. Let's just start because everybody defines AI differently. When the term AI gets used, how do you interpret that?
It's interesting because, I was at an AI conference probably in the 90s. And so it's something that's been around for so long and there's been so many kind of waves of it. For me, it's really, using computers, using compute, to help us reason about data and reason about the world. And I think, that's really where we see, AI being useful now is it's augmenting humans. Rather than, replacing humans and, using sort of essentially algorithms to sort of get more out of, the data and the knowledge that we have, on a day-to-day basis.
At what point, and obviously if you pick up the news or do something along that lines, the word AI and job losses, a lot of times are married. At what point do you see AI, if it's something that helps people, at what point does it go off the deep end and start to, like cash registers, now that you do all the work, prices don't go down, but you get to do all the work for that pleasure. At what point does AI take that down that path?
I think it's interesting. There's a lot of doomerism of, is this going to ruin, job possibilities and things like that. And I guess I've been around long enough that, I see it as a different way that, there's maybe going to be short-term effect, but long-term, it'll open up potential. And there are going to be jobs that are affected by it, but a lot of it just becomes more streamlined and more automated. But there are jobs that maybe it's automated away. But hopefully we can find cross-training for people, that, they can get a job that, is AI augmented and actually they can leverage their knowledge and their experience to now do something even better. I'm definitely optimistic, but not naive to the fact that, in any wave of sort of technology innovation, there's always going to be an immediate effect.
Some discontinuity. I've been at this for a while and, you see this in waves, at least in the software industry, where something new and exciting happens and, people throw up their hands and, decide their hair is on fire. And then either the bubble bursts or they incorporate it into something else. The term knowledge graph is an important component of what Graphit and you talk about. Again, for the base listener who may never have heard of that, how do you define a knowledge graph?
I mean, it's really, I think if you go back to, I mean, Google had a paper a long time ago called, I mean, Things Not Strings. And it's really about organizing the bits of knowledge that we have, the people, the places, the products. I mean, those are really the things that, I mean, I think about that they call them entities. I mean, it's those kind of sort of pieces of data, but it's not about them in kind of individual basis, but it's about the relationships. I mean, I work for a company or I live in a place. And that's just always interested me a lot I mean, data has been something I've been working with for, I mean, my whole career. And it's just kind of, I mean, a given. But I worked in media management for broadcasters. I mean, we were selling products into ESPN and Fox and folks. And the data we were creating was consumed by our eyeballs. I mean, we watch videos but I have this thought of, well, there's so much knowledge embedded in that. I mean, sports statistics, if you're watching sports, or, I mean, just a podcast, obviously have so much information of a rabbit hole you could follow about a paper or a topic. And that brought me to really do more research around knowledge graphs, because it's a way to represent those relationships, in any kind of wider set. And that kind of brings us to the unstructured data of, I mean, it's unstructured at its source, but really there's a structure of knowledge in it. And that's what really interests me.
So once upon a time, I would suggest that would have been a data analyst or a BA or something along that lines. Well, or you watching ESPN kind of thing. Putting those kinds of things together, I would suggest that's interesting, having done a little of all of those three things. But terribly inefficient. How does, a tool like Graphit, how does that change that equation?
Yeah, I mean, and it very much was a manual task. I mean, if you think of kind of the library science domain and kind of organizing knowledge in that, it's a really interesting area, but it was done very manually. I mean, for many years. And so, I mean, we had been working with, kind of early, I mean, AI, you could call it, I mean, natural language processing and computer vision to identify things in the data. I mean, so it could be in words or terms in a PDF. It could be objects on screen with computer vision, and then connecting those relationships. And search and retrieval is such an important part of that. Is okay, like I have a set of data that maybe I'm inspecting a bridge or a port, and there's data in PDFs, there's data in images that I've taken, there might be voice recordings. And how do you connect those dots between all that? Because there's entities that are common across them, but one might be in the visual domain, one might be in the written domain, and one might be in the audible domain.
So lots of data out there and in many different forms. How do you see a tool like this actually being implemented? Is this in a typical organization?
It's really interesting. I mean, that's kind of, we've been around for about 3 years, and we started building a data cataloging tool that people can use to, I mean, ingest all of their data and have a lens to that data that they could search across and see those commonalities. And to be honest, it didn't fly very well because people already had tools that they lived in. They were using SharePoint. I mean, they were using kind of their existing platforms that's where they kind of lived every day, maybe, or other tools. And what it kind of realized is the technology is valuable. The concept is valuable, but how it interacts with the human, it needs to be embedded into their existing application. So not another pane of glass. And that's really what brought us to Graphit, of saying, look, that's where you can build on this technology and integrate it into Slack as a bot, or integrate it as a co-pilot with an existing application. But what folks really don't want is, I got to go over here to touch my knowledge graph. And that's really what our big learning was.
So let's say a local 25 truck plumber organization. I happen to be thinking of that because I got to spend $5,000 on a plumber this week. I love plumbers. They don't listen to the podcast either. But let's say, is that an organization that could leverage something like Graphit?
I mean, I think so. So we sell to developers. So we want people to build applications, and that's what we call like a vertical AI application. So it's an application for a domain of people like plumbers. And what we want to make it easy for is to say somebody builds like a CRM for plumbers, and they want to have the ability to maybe predict, like, okay, who haven't I talked to in a while, or go get me all the communication between them that might be across email and different, I don't know, however people talk with their customers. But auto organization of that data, I mean, pulling out the names, pulling out part numbers, pulling out product or what do you call it? Sort of the problem statement of what I mean, like right now we need a plumber for our disposal. And so it's like, if you could auto organize that data, they can use it very easily. And how they consume it may just be via text message, or it may be a little thing that goes in their email and adds in a little bit of information about the customer. But that's where I really see the next wave of this kind of subtle, usage of AI that plumber doesn't know they're using AI at all. And I think that's the big difference. But it's really like autocomplete in a way. I mean, nobody thinks about all the technology behind that. It's just something we take for granted, really.
So let's say an organization builds this into their product base, or could they actually use it to connect multiple product bases together? Let's say a hospital who probably makes very little of, albeit they might have lots of developers. They don't make most of their big pieces. Could they use that to actually come up with a view of a patient?
Yeah, I mean, healthcare it's a bigger problem to solve. I mean, the data is much more complex, and I mean, I wouldn't say that we have a perfect solution for a hospital today, but I think in sense of, I mean, there is data there. I mean, there's patient records. I've actually talked to dentists who have, they're written notes that they want to OCR and create something that they can summarize, and then they have imagery. So, a hospital would be similar. But yeah, data integration is really at the core. I mean, you can connect up your Slack, connect your email, connect your really any data source that is audio or text or something like that, and we'll canonicalize that into this knowledge graph that then you can start searching and retrieving and having conversations over with these AI models. So yeah, I mean, it's data integration and data ingestion is a big part of the picture.
At that point, it is something a lot more vertical than horizontal at that point. If someone were struggling with the difference between horizontal and vertical, how would you describe that?
The typical way I talk about it is, who does it impact? I mean, for horizontal, we consider ourselves a horizontal platform that, you could apply to so many different consumers. In healthcare, in finance, in entertainment, media. So it's a product that can apply to so many different domains, and you're not really wedded to any one of them. And what we really look at is the data is pretty common. There's PDFs used in, so many different areas. There's PowerPoint, Slack is used. And so for us, we really focus more on the data than the vertical right now. There is some, places that you kind of have hooks to say, oh, I found a place or a company. I want to go enrich that with another data set. That's where the verticalness comes from. So if I found a company or what looks like a product to the AI model, I could call a healthcare specific database to go grab some metadata about it, or I could call Crunchbase to go get company information. And so we kind of look at that as where the verticalness comes from. And what we want is to enable really a wave of vertical app developers. The plumber's assistant, the doctor's assistant, the veterinarian's assistant, that can be tools that leverage this knowledge. But they're the ones really meeting the customer directly. And hopefully, this really can enable, niche markets super easily that can take advantage of generative AI.
How does an organization like yours stay innovative and stay cutting edge?
There's two sides to it where the patterns maybe haven't changed. A lot of what we were doing, what we used to call file-based workflows, taking archive video and preparing it for Netflix or YouTube. You have to have a scalable system. You have to think about storage. You have to think about network. You have to think about searchability. Those patterns aren't different. That's really the same thing. We might just be taking in Slack messages or podcast MP3s now, but the patterns are the same from 20 years ago. But the part that's innovative also you have to be really careful with, because it's changing so quickly these days. Every week there's a new model. Cohere is a new model this week. Maybe OpenAI releases another one next week. And so we really consider ourselves model agnostic, that you have to expect commoditization and change. And I think that's where the value really comes from is don't wed yourself to one technology, wed yourself to the patterns and the workflows. And that's how we stay innovative is, I mean, we can build in a new model in a day or two. And it's really now that we have patterns, we can offer those to customers really quickly.
So tomorrow morning you wake up and suddenly you have the need for 1,000 new people. How do you scale your organization?
I mean, the good thing about us is, I mean, the technology scales automatically from an infrastructure standpoint. And so we're built on a scalable platform that, I mean, if we get 1,000 new signups today, it's really, I mean, like Microsoft Azure does most of the heavy lifting for us. And so we've actually built on a scalable foundation that can adapt quickly. I mean, from our aspect, I mean, what we hope is the actual scaling happens, I mean, really at a feature level of looking at, okay, are there brand new features that could open us up to 1,000 new customers? And we try and anticipate. I mean, I do a lot of research, I mean, both on kind of competitors and new companies, but also sort of themes of what's coming down the road. And we try and anticipate that, maybe not from implementing it necessarily, but having the pattern to know that we can add it in later very easily.
Let's say you had 1,000 new features in your backlog. You start them all tomorrow morning and work on them and just toss them around, or how would you approach that?
No, that's a great question. I mean, I think there's a lost art of like software architecture this is, I think, from my old school kind of days of Microsoft of really looking at, I mean, kind of pre-chewing the work a bit. I mean, kind of coming up with patterns. It's really just more, you're working on the whiteboard. You're coming up with data models that are reusable. You're coming up with workflow patterns. That's where we try and map features to that. And we say, we're prescriptive in the way that we manage the data. And if we have a new feature idea, does it fit in a box? I mean, is there already a place for it in the architecture? So I work that way a lot, where we kind of think about and kind of pre-chew the work a little bit. So then at the time, there's always this idea of like, I mean, do things in threes. I mean, if you have 3 examples of a new feature that come at it from different areas, you can usually abstract an interface to it and say, okay, here's how I think it might work for 10 of them or 20 of them. So usually we do that, or if we get a handful, we can come up with an abstraction. Like just this week we were working on re-ranking for data, saying, what's the relevance of the data that you're providing to the model? And there's different ways to attack it. There's, models out there you can pay for, you can build some of those yourself, but you want to abstract it because somebody might come out with a new one next week that we want to plug in. And so coming up with that's how we really plan out the feature set by those patterns.
When did architecture become sort of a passé discussion?
I mean, it's funny. I mean, probably in the early 2000s, maybe. I've been doing development for a while now, and I think it was kind of that layer of the senior developers sort of watch over everything, kind of manage the patterns, kind of look over that, and that became that architect role. But I think there was a blowback, maybe in the early 2000s around, just not thinking people needed software architecture in their organization. And I think I'm a bit old school that I feel that that's maybe the role of like a CTO or a director, having somebody that can kind of have that vision. But other companies have an opposite idea. Where those roles are just management. In a lot of ways, and the architecture is just on the fly. And everybody kind of does it themselves. So
yeah, I don't know. I've had to maintain code that was not well structured and didn't fit together real well. And I don't know. I spent a lot of sleepless nights. I didn't appreciate that. So maybe I'm a little old school too. That's interesting. If you were an organization and, you're building your software products and wanted to incorporate something like Graphit in, would that, do you think, help differentiate the product?
I think I kind of look at it 2 ways. There's this funnel of data that you need to start with. You got to look at, okay, what data sources do I have? Am I connecting to OneDrive? Am I connecting to Slack or Teams? And kind of what do we have in the organization? Or even what are users uploading? In an end user application, it usually starts with their data, not even the developer's data. And I think that's the first part. And so we manage that funnel of data ingest. So as long as we can have connectors to all the sources of where the data lives, you can start there. And then the organization in the middle, that knowledge graph part, we do automatically. You can guide it via kind of what we call workflows. But at the end of the day, it's still, one consistent blob of information. And then I see it as the consumption is the other side. And that's where, chatbot, that's where the people are starting to add those kind of things. But that's really the first step of low-hanging fruit is the simple Q&A and the RAG concept of, hey, retrieve some data, rank it, figure out what data you pass to the LLMs. But I really see that that's just the scratching the surface. And then you can start to look at agent models that take the output of one query and put it into the input of the next query. I've done work with what are called actor models back in the day and kind of more distributed systems and things like that. And I really see that's where this is going, is the kind of agent world is kind of finding a lot of the innovation that happened in the actor model world maybe 10, 20 years ago. And it's kind of all the same thing. It's workflows that maybe are emergent, that you don't know how many steps the workflow is going to take to get to the end. But there's already good technology a lot for that. We're actually using something from Microsoft called durable entities that is, you can look at it almost like an agent framework. It's a way to create dynamic workflows that run on compute. And those are the kind of things. I'm getting kind of off topic on that, but I think there's ways to integrate all these different things into your applications that then give you these extra capabilities. Search and retrieval, obviously, content publishing and repurposing, and then hopefully these agent models downstream.
If you were to look 5 years from now, would it all be agents?
That's a great question. I think you could say that in a sense it is. I think what we're seeing today is like one-step agents. I think it's doing a query, a Q&A back is kind of an agent that only has one node. If you look at it as a graph. And then there's been talk about, okay, well, you have like an editor that use the LLM as an editor, like a checker. So it takes the output of the original query and then it goes, hey, is this the best response you can really make? And that's kind of a two-node agent. And my thought is it'll all evolve into that. At least that's kind of how we're looking at it, is what we have today is kind of a one-shot agent, but we're going to adapt this to be much more freeform. And you can start to build these sort of really dynamic workflows. And there's some folks out there doing that. There's some great open source projects that are going down this road as well. And it's an area I like a lot, because I think that's going to be, how do you interact with sending an email when you get the response from an LLM, but you have to go and add some more data into it from another system, like your CRM. You have to define these somehow so that they're programmable.
Do you foresee agents talking to agents at some point?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's really, this is where maybe I kind of look more pragmatically, is it ends up all being API calls at the end of the day. It's just, I think I came from more of the old school object-oriented API first kind of world, not data science world. And I look at LLMs as, in a lot of ways, they're just an API call. They have a structure, you're giving them some input, you're getting some output. And I think it gets overcomplicated. I think at a lot of the underpinning and the knobs that you can turn are ending up being automated away, and you really don't have to deal with it. And that's what I want to enable another wave of developers, that you don't have to think about the data science behind it. There's really smart people, smarter than me, that kind of build these models and do that training and all that kind of stuff. But from a user of this technology, you can look at it as a much more, a simpler approach, get more value out of it.
So let's say someone comes to you, or you have a child that says, I'm going to be a developer.
Yeah.
Given where all of this is going, what advice would you give them, other than not to grow up to be a cowboy? No.
Yeah. Well, it's ironic, because my son, we've been talking about this he'd been trying to kind of figure out what to do, didn't want to be a developer. And now I'm kind of just gave him a training list of YouTube videos this week to look at. And I think there's some really interesting areas. And I think it's, even with Python as a good starting language for a lot of folks, it's not, you don't have to be the depth of a developer to think about, infrastructure and distributed systems and scalability and all that. You can really, it goes back to kind of more the scripting languages in the old days, where you can wire together different things. And I think there's going to be a wave of developers that are really focused on the UX and pulling together different APIs, kind of, I mean, not true no code, but maybe just kind of, I mean, piecing things together. And I think, I mean, like Streamlit is a great example of, I mean, kind of we just actually released some sample applications using Streamlit, which really just kind of show off the value. And you can build UI really easily. You can integrate it. I think those kind of tools are going to be the wave of the future of, like Retool is another great one. But the way to build applications without really having to get too deep in the weeds. And I think that's going to open up another wave of developers out there.
Kirk, you wake up tomorrow morning, someone hands you your cup of, or, your caffeinated beverage of choice and the magic wand, and says you have two wishes of how AI will affect the workplace. What would those two wishes be and why?
I mean, the first one, and I thought about this a bit, is, I mean, an alternative to AI inference of how these models run that's 1,000 times cheaper. I mean, or maybe, even more than that. I think there's a gap right now where everything kind of goes through NVIDIA today. And there's some new companies like Grok and folks out there. But, I mean, if somehow this became 1,000 times cheaper, 1,000,000 times cheaper per token and it just becomes something that we could integrate into our products and we wouldn't have to think about cost, because that I think is going to enable a huge wave. Because right now, I think we're still in the way of a lot of innovation is blocked by cost. I mean, it costs millions of dollars to train a new model. I would love to have the ability to train a model just on my Slack and just on a smaller domain set of data and have better tooling for that. I was a little tangent, but I was just thinking about it last night of like, there's so much information that is encoded in these models, like, I mean, Shakespeare and knowledge about different esoteric things that I don't care about. Like when I'm asking it a question in my bot about a Jira ticket, like there's this massive amount of data that, I think that's where domain specific knowledge and having the ability to spin these up almost on demand, I think that's where the cost factor could come into play, as well as the tooling factor. But that's an area I think is going to be really interesting over the next 5 years is, as costs go down, the ability to have domain specific.
Do you think the cost of compute is actually going to fall?
We've seen a little bit of it, but I hope, I don't, these are all businesses. They're all trying to make margin. It would be one of those things where somebody has to come up with something that for some reason, like they figure out how to run it on CPU instead of GPU or just get more value out of it. But I know companies, we all have to make money too. So it'll be interesting. It'll really be interesting to see if somebody kind of cracks it and we go a different direction in a couple of years. I think NVIDIA has done such a great job, and I worked with CUDA in the really early days before all the AI stuff. And it's really hard to move the needle against somebody like that.
Okay. That's one still. Sorry, I took you off that.
No, that's great.
Second B.
The other one that I've always seen, and this is a bit more of a more specific thing, is in the knowledge graph space. There's now starting to be commoditized embedding models for text and for audio that let you find similarity between that data. The thing that doesn't exist off the shelf is a graph embedding. There's still some projects and research around this, but like OpenAI doesn't have one. Cohere doesn't have one. You can't just grab one off the shelf that you could point at a knowledge graph and say, okay, cluster it, find me the similarity and make it fast and cheap. And I really think that could open up a huge amount of value for these knowledge-based applications where, I am trying to relate my world of, okay, who am I talking to? What topics am I talking about? It can see my calendar, what I'm going to do. And it's kind of a recommendation engine. Like, can it then find similarity with my personal knowledge graph and the domain knowledge graph of my work, my business? And I really think that commoditized graph embedding models is going to, help move the needle on that. So I think I've been tracking it for like the last 5 years and it hasn't become a thing yet, but I think it'd be really cool if somebody kind of came up with a way that could be, super commoditized.
Kurt, if someone wanted to continue the conversation, they wanted to find out about you, Graphit, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, a great way is just our website. Graphit.com. We're also on Twitter, myself and the company post a lot of examples and documentation and articles on Twitter, LinkedIn, obviously, as well. So any of those would be great.
This has been absolutely marvelous. At this point, I open up the platform for you to promote anything that you'd like. I mean, the podcast has been out for roughly for about 18 years. Selling your car on eBay, probably not the right thing to do at this point. But
no, I appreciate it. I mean, really, we're just looking to meet people that maybe weren't originally thinking of incorporating AI into their applications and generative AI specifically, and want an easy way to do it. And so we're trying to make Graphit available that, I mean, really easy to put data into, really easy to search your data, and really easy to integrate without having to be a data scientist, and maybe without having to learn everything, like go to college about RAG and LLMs and everything, and they can get up and running in minutes. So yeah, I'd love to talk to anybody, especially in these vertical markets. I think there's so many interesting markets. I mean, I meet people every day that are in a little niche and they're like, wait, can I use it for this, of this like data in this PDF? And I was like, yeah, I mean, you may not think of it. It may be kind of, I mean, it's something we could do out of the box today, and I hadn't even thought about it.
Kirk Marple, thank you for spending time, your morning, my afternoon, with the Software Process and Measurement Cast listeners.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
In Reread Saturday Notes, well, hopefully we have concluding thoughts. If not, that'll be next week. Again, things are pretty messed up here in Northern Ohio with a tornado that roamed through, I think, right over my house. The SPaMCAST 824 will include the story of the Avon Lake tornado, the sound and smell of generators in the morning, and a conversation with Jon M. Quigley. If process improvement is a never-ending story, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?